The crimson sun dipped low on the western horizon, painting the desert in hues of amber and gold as Dawn Hawk stood with her head held high, despite the mockery that stung like arrows around her. The year was 1878, and the Apache tribe's council circle had become a place of humiliation rather than honor for the 20-year-old woman whose mixed heritage had always made her an outsider. "She is nothing but a half-blood," sneered Broken Arrow, the aging war chief whose cruel eyes narrowed as he circled Dawn. "Her mother may have been Apache, but her father's white blood makes her unworthy of a true warrior." Dawn's fingers curled into fists at her sides, her dark eyes fixed on the distant mountains rather than the faces of those who had once been her people. Her mother had died 3 winters ago from fever, leaving Dawn unprotected from the growing resentment within the tribe. Her father, a white trader who had truly loved her mother, had been killed by soldiers 5 years earlier, making her doubly cursed in the eyes of many. Chief Running Wolf, once her mother's friend, now looked at her with resignation rather than kindness. "The council has decided," he announced, his voice carrying across the gathering. "Dawn Hawk will be given to the first white man who passes through our territory. Perhaps her pale blood will make her a suitable wife for one of them." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Dawn felt her cheeks burn with shame, but she refused to lower her gaze. They were sending her away not as a bride of value, but as a joke, a way to rid themselves of a reminder of their own losses to the white settlers who continued to encroach upon their lands. "Tomorrow," Running Wolf continued, "when the traders come through the pass, we will offer her. Let her live among her father's people if she is not welcome among ours." As the council dispersed, only Morning Star, an elderly woman who had been her mother's closest friend, approached Dawn. "Do not let your spirit break, child," she whispered, pressing a small pouch of herbs into Dawn's hand. "Sometimes the Great Spirit has plans we cannot see." Dawn clutched the pouch and nodded, though she found little comfort in the words. That night, as she sat alone outside her small dwelling at the edge of the encampment, she watched the stars emerge one by one, wondering which path they might illuminate for her now that she had been cast aside. Miles away, Lucas Callahan was making camp for the night, his horse grazing contentedly nearby as he built a small fire. At 25, Lucas had already lived several lifetimes' worth of experiences. Orphaned at 12, he'd worked cattle drives, prospected for gold, and even ridden briefly with the Pony Express before it folded. Now he made his living trading goods between settlements, a dangerous but lucrative profession in these untamed territories. "What do you think, Thunder?" he asked his stallion, who merely flicked an ear in response. "Another day's ride should get us to that Apache settlement. Maybe we can trade those blankets for some of their finely tanned hides." Lucas had earned an unusual reputation among both settlers and native tribes. Unlike many of his white contemporaries, he spoke several tribal languages passably well and treated the indigenous people with respect. He'd learned early that respect was often repaid in kind, and a trader who couldn't be trusted quickly became a dead traitor in these parts. As he settled in for the night, pulling his blanket around his shoulders, Lucas had no idea that the next day would change the course of his life forever. Dawn rose before the sun, washing herself carefully in the cold stream that ran near the encampment. If she was to be given away, she would at least maintain her dignity. She braided her long black hair with practiced fingers, the motion soothing her frayed nerves. From a small wooden box, one of the few possessions her father had given her, she withdrew a silver comb that had once belonged to her mother. "I will not shame you," she whispered to the memory of her parents as she tucked the comb back into the box. By mid-morning, scouts reported the approach of a lone trader. Dawn was summoned to the center of the village, where she stood beside Running Wolf as the white man rode in on a powerful black stallion. Lucas approached the Apache settlement with caution. He'd traded with this particular band before, but tensions had been growing throughout the territory as more settlers pushed westward. As he rode into the central clearing, he immediately sensed something was different. The usual bustle of trading preparations was absent. Instead, most of the tribe seemed gathered in anticipation of something. "Greetings, Chief Running Wolf," Lucas said in the Apache tongue, dismounting and giving a respectful nod to the tribal leader. "Lucas Callahan," the chief acknowledged. "The spirits have guided your arrival well." Lucas frowned slightly at the odd welcome. His eyes drifted to the young woman standing beside the chief, straight-backed, proud, and undeniably beautiful, though her expression was as hard as stone. "I have brought goods to trade," Lucas said, gesturing to his packhorse. "Blankets from the east, sugar, coffee, and some fine steel knives." Running Wolf nodded, but instead of discussing terms, he placed a hand on the young woman's shoulder. "Today we offer you more than goods. This is Dawn Hawk. She carries white blood and belongs with your people. Take her as your wife, and there will be no cost for your trading goods." A ripple of barely suppressed laughter moved through the assembled tribe members. Lucas's brow furrowed as he looked more closely at Dawn. Her face remained impassive, but he could see the fire in her dark eyes and the humiliation she fought to conceal. In that moment, Lucas understood what was happening. This wasn't a genuine offer of marriage, it was some form of punishment or rejection. They were using this woman as a token in a game where neither she nor he was meant to win. Lucas had seen enough cruelty in his life to recognize it instantly, regardless of whether it came from white settlers or native tribes. His jaw tightened as he made a decision that would forever alter both their lives. "I accept," he said clearly, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent gathering. Dawn's eyes widened in surprise, the first crack in her carefully maintained composure. Running Wolf also seemed taken aback, clearly not expecting the trader to agree so readily. "You understand what you are accepting?" the chief asked slowly. Lucas met Dawn's gaze directly. "I understand perfectly. I will take Dawn Hawk as my wife, and I will honor her as such." A murmur of confusion spread through the tribe. This was not how their mockery was supposed to unfold. The white trader was meant to be uncomfortable, to refuse, or perhaps to make a counter-offer for trade goods instead. His straightforward acceptance had disrupted their plan. "Then it shall be done," Running Wolf declared, recovering quickly. "Today, before the sun reaches its peak, you will be bound together." Lucas nodded, never taking his eyes from Dawn's face. She was studying him now, suspicion evident in her expression. He couldn't blame her. To her, he was just another white man, perhaps playing along with her tribe's cruel joke for reasons of his own. "May I speak with my intended?" Lucas asked the chief. Running Wolf hesitated, then nodded. Briefly. Lucas stepped closer to Dawn, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "I know this isn't what you would choose," he said quietly, "but I promise you this: I will respect you, and you will have the freedom to determine your own path once we are away from here." Dawn's dark eyes narrowed. "Why would you do this?" she asked in perfect, unaccented English that surprised him. "What do you gain?" "Perhaps I simply don't appreciate seeing anyone treated as less than they are," he replied. "I've been on the receiving end of such treatment myself." Before she could respond, Running Wolf stepped forward. "There is no need for private words. Prepare for the ceremony." Lucas returned to his horses, retrieving a small wooden box from his saddlebag. If this was to be a wedding, however unexpected, he would not enter into it empty-handed. The ceremony was brief and lacked the traditional celebrations that would normally accompany an Apache wedding. A few symbolic gestures were performed, words spoken by Running Wolf, and then Lucas and Dawn were declared bound to one another. As the final words were pronounced, Lucas opened the wooden box and withdrew a simple silver band. Dawn's eyes widened as he gently took her hand and slipped the ring onto her finger. "My mother's," he explained quietly. "I've carried it with me always." The unexpected gesture silenced the last few whispers of amusement from the tribe. This white man was treating the ceremony with genuine respect, turning their mockery into something more substantial than they had intended. As the ceremony concluded, Running Wolf gestured toward Dawn's dwelling. "Gather your belongings. You will leave with your husband before the sun begins its descent." Dawn moved quickly, grateful for the chance to escape the scrutiny of the tribe. Inside her small shelter, she collected the few items that truly belonged to her: father's hunting knife, her mother's silver comb, a carefully preserved dress that had been her mother's wedding garment, and a small parfleche containing dried herbs and medicines Morning Star had taught her to use. As she was finishing, the elderly woman herself appeared at the entrance. "Dawn Hawk," she said softly, "the spirits work in ways we cannot always understand." Dawn paused in her packing. "They have strange humor, these spirits," she replied bitterly. Morning Star shook her head. "I have watched this man in previous visits. He is not like many of the white traders. There is respect in his eyes. Respect or not, I am being sent away from the only home I have known. This has not been your home since your mother joined the ancestors," Morning Star said gently. "You have been tolerated, not embraced." Dawn couldn't argue with the truth of those words. Since her mother's death, she had existed on the periphery of tribal life, increasingly unwelcome as tensions with white settlers grew. "Take this," Morning Star said, pressing a small woven bag into Dawn's hands. "Seeds from your mother's garden. Perhaps you will find earth to plant them somewhere new." Dawn's throat tightened with emotion as she carefully tucked the seed pouch into her parfleche. "Thank you," she whispered. When she emerged with her few possessions, Lucas was waiting, having already loaded his trade goods back onto his packhorse. The tribe had gathered again, watching in silence as he helped secure Dawn's belongings. "I have a horse for you," he said, indicating a chestnut mare with a white blaze. "Unless you'd prefer to ride with me." "I can ride," Dawn replied stiffly, approaching the mare with a practiced eye. The horse was well cared for with strong legs and clear eyes. Lucas offered his hand to help her mount, but Dawn ignored it, swinging herself gracefully onto the mare's back. A faint smile touched his lips at her independence. With minimal farewells, only Morning Star stepped forward to touch Dawn's foot in a gesture of blessing. They rode away from the encampment, Dawn resolutely not looking back at the people who had rejected her. They rode in silence until the Apache camp was well behind them, the sun now beginning its slow descent toward the western horizon. Lucas finally spoke when they reached a small stream where he suggested they water the horses. "We should make camp in about 2 hours," he said as they dismounted. "There's a protected hollow I know, with good water and enough grass for the horses." Dawn nodded but remained silent, leading her mare to the stream's edge. Lucas watched her for a moment, then said, "I meant what I said back there, this arrangement. It doesn't have to be what they intended." Dawn turned to face him fully. "And what did they intend, Lucas Callahan?" she asked, speaking his name for the first time. "That you would take me as a plaything, that you would use me and discard me, or perhaps they thought you would treat me as a servant." "I believe they didn't think I would accept at all," Lucas replied honestly. "They wanted to humiliate you and unsettle me. They succeeded in neither. Yet here we are, bound by their words." Lucas shook his head. "Where I come from, a marriage requires more than words spoken under duress. I consider our arrangement temporary until you decide what you truly want." Dawn studied him carefully. He was tall, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of the summer sky. His dark blonde hair was tied back with a leather thong, and a short beard covered his jaw. He did not look like the type of man who would make such an offer without expecting something in return. "And what do you want?" she asked bluntly. "Right now," he replied with a slight smile, "to reach our camping spot before dark, make a decent meal, and get some rest. Beyond that, I haven't thought much further than helping someone who didn't deserve the treatment they were receiving." Dawn wasn't entirely convinced by his apparent selflessness, but she had few options. She could try to make her own way, but a lone woman, especially one with mixed blood, would find little welcome in either white settlements or native territories. "Let us continue then," she said, remounting her horse. As promised, they reached a sheltered hollow just as twilight was deepening into night. Lucas moved with practiced efficiency, setting up a small camp while Dawn, unwilling to play the role of passive companion, gathered firewood without being asked. "You've done this before," Lucas observed as she returned with an armful of suitable kindling. "I was not pampered in the tribe," she replied, arranging the wood for a fire. "My mother taught me to be useful." Lucas nodded, striking a match to light the fire she had built. "My father taught me the same before he died." The simple statement hung in the air between them, a small piece of common ground in their otherwise vastly different lives. As the fire caught and grew, Lucas retrieved cooking supplies from his pack. "Are you hungry?" he asked. "I have dried meat, beans, and some cornmeal for bread." Dawn nodded, and they worked together preparing a simple meal, their movements around the campfire creating a domestic scene at odds with the circumstances that had brought them together. As they ate, Lucas broke the comfortable silence that had developed. "Tell me about yourself, Dawn Hawk." She looked up from her plate, studying him in the flickering firelight. "What do you wish to know?" "Whatever you want to share, your story, how you came to be in that situation today." Dawn was quiet for a long moment, considering his request. Finally, she began to speak, her voice low and measured. "My mother was running Wolf's cousin, a respected healer among our people. My father was a trader like you, but he stayed. He learned our ways, earned respect. They loved each other truly." Her expression softened at the memory. "When I was young, before the troubles between our peoples grew worse, we were accepted, not completely perhaps, but enough." "What changed?" Lucas asked, genuine interest in his voice. "Everything," Dawn replied simply. "Soldiers came more frequently. Treaties were broken. My father was killed trying to prevent an attack on white settlers. The tribe blamed him for interfering. The soldiers didn't care that he was trying to help. After that, we were tolerated only because of my mother's position." "And after she died," Dawn's jaw tightened, "I became a reminder of everything they had lost. Broken Arrow lost 2 sons to white soldiers. He turned the tribe's grief against me." Lucas nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "So today was the culmination of years of resentment." "Yes. They thought no white man would accept such an offer. I would be rejected twice over. Yet here we are," Lucas said softly. Dawn met his gaze across the fire. "Yes, here we are." She paused, then asked, "Why did you really accept?" Lucas set his plate aside, considering his answer carefully. "I've seen how people treat those they consider other. My mother was Irish. My father was a Callahan, but his father was Mexican. I grew up watching my mother endure the whispers, the turned backs, when I saw how they were treating you." He shrugged. "I couldn't walk away." Dawn absorbed this information, finding it difficult to reconcile with her expectation of white men's behavior. "So this is charity?" she asked, unable to keep a trace of bitterness from her voice. "No," Lucas replied firmly. "This is one human being recognizing the worth of another when others have failed to do so." The simple dignity in his words silenced her protests. They finished their meal without further conversation, both lost in thought as the night deepened around them. Later, as Lucas spread his bedroll on one side of the fire and indicated she should take the other side, Dawn finally spoke again. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Not for taking me away, I could have found my own path if necessary, but for not making me the subject of their mockery." Lucas looked up, meeting her gaze across the dying embers of their fire. "You're welcome, Dawn Hawk. Get some rest. We have a long journey ahead of us." "Where are we going?" she asked, realizing she hadn't thought to ask this fundamental question before now. "I have a small homestead near a place called Willow Creek, about 5 days' ride from here. We can go there if that suits you, or I can take you somewhere else if you prefer." Dawn considered this. "Your homestead," she decided. At least there she might have time to determine her next steps without the immediate pressure of strange surroundings. Lucas nodded, settling onto his bedroll. "Good night, then." "Good night, Lucas Callahan," Dawn replied, lying down and pulling her blanket around her shoulders. As she drifted towards sleep, Dawn realized that for the first time in years, she had spoken her true thoughts to another person without fear of judgment or reprisal. Whatever came next, that small freedom was something to treasure. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, the desert air carrying the scent of sage and juniper. Dawn woke first, her body accustomed to rising with the sun. For a moment, disorientation gripped her as she took in her surroundings: the unfamiliar campsite, the horses grazing nearby, and the man still sleeping on the other side of the cold fire pit. Lucas Callahan. Her husband, at least according to Apache ceremony. Dawn rose silently, moving toward the small stream that ran near their campsite. She knelt beside it, splashing cold water on her face and letting the shock of it clear her mind. As she straightened, she caught sight of her reflection in a still pool, the same face she had always known, yet somehow different now. She was no longer Dawn Hawk of the Apache. Who was she now? Good morning. She turned to find Lucas approaching, giving her plenty of space as if understanding her need for solitude. "The water's cold," she said. For lack of anything more meaningful, he smiled slightly. "Always is this time of year." He knelt downstream from her, following her example by washing his face. "Did you sleep well?" Dawn nodded, though in truth she had slept fitfully, waking at every unfamiliar sound. "I will start the fire again," she offered, moving back toward their camp. As she rekindled the flames from the remaining embers, Dawn watched Lucas from the corner of her eye. He moved with an easy confidence, caring for the horses before returning to help with breakfast preparations. There was nothing in his manner that suggested he viewed her as property acquired in a trade, which both relieved and confused her. They ate a simple breakfast of cornmeal mush sweetened with a precious spoonful of sugar from Lucas's supplies. As they packed up camp, Lucas outlined their route for the day. "We'll follow this stream for about 10 miles, then head northwest toward the pass in those mountains," he said, gesturing toward a distant range. "The land opens up beyond them, good grazing country." "My place is in a valley on the other side," Dawn nodded, securing her parfletch to the mare's saddle. "This is good horse," she commented, stroking the animal's neck. "Her name is Ember," Lucas said. "She's yours now if you want her." Dawn looked up sharply. "Mine." "Every person needs their own horse in these parts. Consider her a wedding gift, if you like." Dawn was momentarily speechless. A good horse was valuable, especially one as well trained as Ember appeared to be. That Lucas would simply give her such a gift reinforced her confusion about his motives. "Thank you," she said finally, uncertainty evident in her voice. Lucas seemed to understand her hesitation. "Dawn," he said gently, "I know this situation is unusual, but I want you to know that I meant what I said yesterday. You're free to make your own choices. I'm not expecting anything from you that you're not willing to give." Dawn met his gaze, searching for any sign of deception. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "I understand." "Good," he replied with a small smile. "Now shall we get moving? We've got a lot of ground to cover." They rode for most of the day, stopping occasionally to rest the horses and once for a brief midday meal. As they traveled, Lucas pointed out landmarks and shared stories of his previous journeys through this territory. Dawn found herself gradually relaxing in his company, even offering occasional observations of her own about the plants they passed or signs of wildlife she noticed. By late afternoon, they had reached the foothills of the mountain range Lucas had indicated. "There's a good camping spot about an hour ahead," he said as they paused to water the horses at a small spring. "We'll reach the pass tomorrow." Dawn nodded, her attention suddenly caught by movement in the rocks above them. "Lucas," she said quietly, nodding toward the ridge. He followed her gaze, his hand moving casually to the rifle secured to his saddle. "I see them," he murmured. "3 riders watching us, not Apache," Dawn observed, noting the different style of dress even at this distance. "Comanche, most likely," Lucas replied. "We're near their hunting grounds." Dawn felt a flutter of anxiety. The Comanche were feared warriors, and while they might simply be patrolling their territory, encounters could quickly turn dangerous. "Should we turn back?" she asked. Lucas shook his head slightly. "No sudden movements. We'll continue as planned. They're just watching for now." They mounted again and proceeded at a steady pace, neither hurrying nor dawdling. Dawn could feel the weight of the observers' gazes on her back as they rode, but the Comanche made no move to approach. "They're following," she said softly after they had ridden for about 20 minutes. "I know," Lucas replied, "but they're keeping their distance. That's a good sign." As they approached a narrow passage between 2 rocky outcroppings, Lucas suddenly raised his hand, signaling for Dawn to stop. His eyes scanned the path ahead, narrowing as he spotted something. "What is it?" Dawn asked, her hand instinctively moving to the knife secured at her waist. Her father's knife, one of her few possessions. "Tracks," Lucas said grimly. "Fresh ones. There are more of them ahead, waiting." Dawn's heart raced as she realized they were being herded into an ambush. The riders behind them were driving them toward others waiting in the pass. "We need to find another way," she said, her eyes already searching the terrain for alternatives. Lucas nodded, his expression tense but focused. "There," he said, pointing to a steep trail that branched off to their right, climbing up the rocky slope. It's rough going, but Ember and Thunder can handle it. It loops around and joins the main trail beyond the pass. Without hesitation, they turned their horses toward the side trail. As they did, a shout came from behind them, their pursuers realizing their quarry was deviating from the expected path. "Ride hard," Lucas urged, and they spurred their horses forward. The trail was indeed rough, little more than a game path winding up the steep incline. Dawn leaned low over Ember's neck, murmuring encouragement as the mare picked her way skillfully over loose rocks and around sharp turns. Behind them, they could hear the sounds of pursuit, but the narrowness of the trail prevented their hunters from closing the distance quickly. As they crested a ridge, Lucas suddenly pulled Thunder to a halt, Dawn following suit. Below them, the trail descended into a small, hidden valley where 3 more Comanche warriors waited, alerted by the shouts of their companions. "They know these mountains better than we do," Lucas said grimly. Dawn's mind raced, drawing on her knowledge of the land. "The stream," she said suddenly. "It continues up through those rocks. We can follow it to higher ground." Lucas looked where she indicated a steep, rocky climb alongside a narrow waterfall. "It wasn't a trail at all, but the horses might be able to navigate it. It's our best chance," he agreed. They turned their mounts toward the waterfall, urging them into the icy water at its base. The horses balked initially at the difficult terrain, but both responded to their riders' confident guidance. As they began to climb, a war cry echoed behind them. The pursuing Comanche had reached the ridge and spotted their escape attempt. "Keep going," Lucas called over the sound of the rushing water. "Don't look back." Dawn pressed forward, guiding Ember carefully from one precarious foothold to the next. Water soaked her clothing, and sharp rocks threatened to catch the horse's legs, but there was no turning back now. An arrow whistled past Dawn's head, close enough that she felt the disturbance in the air. Another struck a rock near Ember's hooves, causing the mare to snort in alarm. "Almost there," Lucas encouraged from just behind her. With a final scramble, they reached the top of the falls, emerging onto a rocky plateau. Without pausing, they urged their horses into a gallop across the open ground, heading for the shelter of a dense pine forest visible on the far side. More arrows followed them, but the increased distance made accuracy difficult. By the time they reached the tree line, the sounds of pursuit had faded. The Comanche, it seemed, were unwilling to follow them into unfamiliar territory when the effort outweighed the potential reward. Still, Lucas and Dawn rode hard for another hour, weaving through the trees and crossing several small streams to obscure their trail, before finally slowing to a walk to allow their exhausted horses to recover. "You know the land well," Lucas said, breaking the tense silence that had fallen between them. "That was quick thinking back there," Dawn nodded, still scanning their surroundings for any sign of danger. "My father taught me to always look for the path others might overlook." "Good advice," Lucas replied with a tired smile. "I think we've lost them, but we should keep moving until dark." They continued through the forest as the afternoon waned into evening. The terrain was unfamiliar to both of them now, having deviated significantly from their planned route, but Lucas seemed confident in his ability to navigate back toward their destination. As twilight deepened, they found a small clearing beside a quiet stream different from the one they had initially followed, but offering the water they needed. Both dismounted stiffly, their bodies aching from the day's exertions. "No fire tonight," Lucas said as they cared for the horses. "Just to be safe," Dawn agreed, helping to set up a cold camp. They ate dried meat and hard biscuits from Lucas's supplies, washing it down with cool water from the stream. As they sat side by side, backs against a fallen log, the reality of their shared danger settled over them. They had worked together seamlessly during the escape, each trusting the other's judgment without question. "Thank you," Lucas said quietly, "for spotting the warriors when you did. If we'd ridden into that ambush unaware." Dawn nodded, understanding the unspoken conclusion. "We make a good team," she said, surprising herself with the admission. Lucas turned to look at her, his expression thoughtful in the gathering darkness. "We do," he agreed. Then, after a pause, "I'm sorry your introduction to life with me has been so eventful." Despite herself, Dawn felt a small smile tugging at her lips. "Better eventful than boring," she replied. Lucas laughed softly, the sound warming something inside her that had been cold for too long. That's one way to look at it. As night fully claimed the forest, they prepared for sleep, spreading their bedrolls closer together than the previous night, a tacit acknowledgement of their shared vulnerability and the need to remain alert for danger. "I'll take first watch," Lucas offered, but Dawn shook her head. "You guided us through the forest. Rest first. I will wake you in a few hours." He looked as if he might argue, then nodded, settling onto his bedroll. "Wake me at any sign of trouble," he instructed. "I will," she promised. As Lucas drifted into sleep, Dawn sat vigilant, knife in hand, listening to the night sounds of the forest. Strangely, despite the day's dangers, or perhaps because of them, she felt more at peace than she had in many months. Here, with this unexpected husband, she was valued for her skills and knowledge rather than judged for her mixed blood. It was a novel feeling, and one she was not yet ready to fully trust. But as she watched Lucas's chest rise and fall in the dim starlight filtering through the trees, Dawn allowed herself to consider, for the first time, that perhaps the Great Spirit had indeed been guiding her path when the tribe cast her out. The next morning brought mist and a gentle rain that pattered softly on the forest canopy above them. Dawn, who had eventually woken Lucas for his turn at watch and then slept deeply, opened her eyes to find him already awake, studying a small compass. "Good morning," he said, noticing her stirring. "How did you sleep?" "Better than expected," she admitted, sitting up and running a hand through her hair, which had come partially loose from its braid during the night. "The rain is both good and bad news," Lucas said, tucking the compass back into his pocket. "Good because it will wash away any remaining traces of our trail, bad because it makes navigation more challenging." Dawn nodded, understanding the dilemma. Without clear visibility of the sun or stars, finding their way back to familiar territory would be more difficult. "I believe we need to head southwest," Lucas continued, pointing through the trees. "There's a trading post about a day's ride in that direction, run by a friend of mine. From there, we can get our bearings and supplies." They ate a quick breakfast of the remaining dried food, then saddled the horses and set out into the misty forest. The rain continued steadily, soaking through their clothing despite Lucas's offer of an oilskin coat, which Dawn declined, unwilling to take his only protection from the elements. As they rode, Dawn found herself studying Lucas more carefully than before. The previous day's danger had revealed aspects of his character that intrigued her: his quick thinking, his willingness to trust her judgment, and his calm under pressure. He was nothing like the crude, domineering white men she had occasionally encountered in her life. "Tell me about your homestead," she said, breaking the companionable silence that had developed between them. Lucas glanced over, seeming pleased by her interest. "It's modest but growing," he replied. "I have about 50 acres of decent grazing land, a small cabin that I've been expanding, and a good well. The creek runs year-round, even in drought years. I've planted some fruit trees that are just starting to bear, and there's a vegetable garden that's probably overrun with weeds by now." "You live there alone?" Dawn asked, then immediately wondered if the question was too personal. Lucas didn't seem to mind. "For the past 3 years, yes. Before that, I shared it with Daniel Porter, an older fellow who taught me most of what I know about ranching. He passed on 2 winters ago." "I am sorry for your loss," Dawn said sincerely. Lucas nodded his thanks. "He was a good man, left me the land in his will, said I'd done more with it than he ever had." He paused, then added, "It's a good place for a fresh start." The implication hung between them that it could be such a place for her as well. Dawn wasn't ready to commit to such a future, but neither did she reject the possibility outright. "Do you have livestock?" she asked, steering the conversation back to practical matters. "A small herd of cattle, about 20 head, 6 horses including Thunder and Ember, some chickens." He smiled slightly. "And one very opinionated goat named Hector who refuses to acknowledge my authority over anything." Dawn couldn't help but smile at the description. "I have some experience with goats. They respect consistency more than authority." "I'll remember that advice," Lucas replied, his eyes crinkling with genuine amusement. They continued through the rain-soaked forest, their conversation flowing more easily now as they discussed practical aspects of homestead life. Dawn found herself sharing knowledge her mother had taught her about medicinal plants, while Lucas described his efforts to establish an orchard of apple and peach trees. By midday, the rain had lessened to a drizzle, and they began to see signs that they were approaching more traveled areas, the occasional blaze mark on a tree, a rough trail that showed signs of recent use. "We're getting close to Trader's Creek," Lucas said as they paused to rest the horses. "The trading post is just beyond that ridge." As they crested the ridge an hour later, Dawn saw a collection of buildings nestled in a small valley below. It wasn't a proper town, just a trading post with a few outbuildings, but after their isolation in the forest, it was a welcome sight. "That's MacGregor's place," Lucas explained as they began their descent. "Angus MacGregor, Scottish fellow, came out here 30 years ago and never left. He's gruff but fair." As they approached the main building, a sturdy log structure with a covered porch running its length, an older man with a shock of white hair and a bushy beard emerged, rifle in hand. Upon recognizing Lucas, however, his wary expression transformed into a broad smile. "Lucas Callahan, you old fox," he called, his voice carrying a thick Scottish brogue. "Thought you were headed to Apache territory." "Change of plans, Angus," Lucas replied as they rode into the yard. "Had a bit of trouble with some Comanche scouts." MacGregor's gaze shifted to Dawn, curiosity evident in his weathered face. "I see you've got company," he observed. Lucas dismounted, then moved to help Dawn from her horse. She accepted his assistance this time, her muscles stiff from 2 days of hard riding. "Angus MacGregor, this is Dawn Hawk Callahan," Lucas said, the addition of his surname to hers causing Dawn to glance at him sharply. "My wife." MacGregor's bushy eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Wife," he repeated. "Well now, that is news indeed. When did this happen?" "Recently," Lucas replied, his hand resting lightly at the small of Dawn's back, a gesture that felt both protective and oddly comforting. "It's a long story." "I'll bet it is," MacGregor chuckled. "Well, come in, you both look half drowned and completely exhausted. Martha." He called toward the building. "Put on some coffee and heat up some stew. We've got guests." A plump, pleasant-faced woman appeared in the doorway, her surprise at seeing a bedraggled couple quickly giving way to practical hospitality. "Well, don't just stand there in the rain. Come inside and get dry." Lucas and Dawn followed the MacGregors into the trading post, which served as both store and home. A large hearth dominated one wall, a welcome fire already burning within it. Martha quickly ushered Dawn behind a screen to change into dry clothing, a simple dress that was too large but blissfully dry, while Lucas changed into spare clothes borrowed from MacGregor. Once they were settled at the rough-hewn table with steaming bowls of venison stew and hot coffee, MacGregor leaned forward, his expression curious. "Now then, let's hear this story of yours. Last I knew, you were a confirmed bachelor with no interest in changing your ways." Lucas glanced at Dawn, clearly uncertain how much of their unusual circumstances to share. She gave him a small nod, granting permission to tell their tale. "Dawn was part of the Apache band I went to trade with," Lucas began, choosing his words carefully. "There was conflict within the tribe regarding her place there. Her mother was Apache, her father a white trader." MacGregor nodded slowly, beginning to understand. "Mixed blood, that can be a difficult position in troubled times." "Yes," Lucas continued, "the tribe decided she should leave. They offered her to me as part of a trading arrangement." Martha gasped softly at this, her kind eyes filling with sympathy as she looked at Dawn. "It wasn't what either of us planned," Lucas added quickly, "but sometimes life takes unexpected turns. We were married according to Apache custom before we left. And then you ran into Comanche trouble," MacGregor concluded. "You've had quite the introduction to married life, lass," he said to Dawn. Dawn, who had remained silent during Lucas's explanation, met the older man's gaze steadily. "Life is rarely simple," she replied, "but Lucas has been honorable and kind. Something in her tone, the implicit comparison to others who had been neither honorable nor kind, wasn't lost on the MacGregors. Martha reached across the table and patted Dawn's hand gently. "Well, you're welcome here for as long as you need," she said warmly. "It's not often we get female company, and I could use the help with some mending if you're willing." Dawn nodded, grateful for the woman's acceptance and the offer of useful work. "I would be happy to help. And I could use an extra pair of hands repairing that South Corral fence," MacGregor said to Lucas. "If you're planning to stay a day or two." "We'd appreciate that," Lucas replied. "We need to resupply before continuing to my place, and the horses could use the rest." With practical matters settled, the conversation turned to news of the territory, which settlements were growing, which trails were considered safe, and the ever-shifting relationships between the various tribes and the white settlers. Later, as darkness fell, Martha showed Dawn to a small but clean guest room at the back of the building. Lucas would sleep in the adjacent storeroom, she explained, as they had limited space. "Thank you for your hospitality," Dawn said as Martha provided her with a nightgown and additional blankets. "It is unexpected," Martha's kind face softened with understanding. "Life out here is hard enough without turning away folks in need," she said. "And any wife of Lucas Callahan is welcome under our roof. He's a good man," Dawn nodded, not contradicting the older woman's assumption about the nature of their marriage. "Yes," she agreed softly. "I believe he is." After Martha left, Dawn sat on the edge of the narrow bed, her fingers unconsciously twisting the silver ring Lucas had placed on her finger during their ceremony. In just 2 days, her life had transformed completely. She had gone from being an unwanted outcast to being introduced as Dawn Hawk Callahan, wife of a respected trader. It was a role she had never imagined for herself, yet as she prepared for sleep in the safety of the MacGregors' home, Dawn found herself considering the possibility that this unexpected path might lead somewhere worth following. Dawn woke the next morning to the enticing aroma of frying bacon and fresh bread. For a moment, the unfamiliar surroundings confused her, but as memories of the previous day returned, she rose quickly and dressed in her own clothing, which Martha had kindly washed and dried overnight. When she emerged from the guest room, she found the MacGregors and Lucas already at breakfast, their conversation pausing as she entered. "Good morning," Lucas greeted her with a warm smile. "Did you sleep well?" "Very well, thank you," Dawn replied, taking the empty seat beside him, the one that had clearly been left for her. Martha bustled over with a plate of food. "Eat up, dear, nothing like a good breakfast to start the day." As Dawn enjoyed the best meal she'd had in days, she listened to the men discuss their plans for repairing the corral fence. MacGregor's trading post, it seemed, served not just as a place to exchange goods but also as a way station for travelers and occasionally as temporary housing for cowboys moving cattle through the territory. "And what are your plans for the day, Dawn?" Martha asked as the meal was winding down. Before Dawn could respond, Lucas spoke up. "Dawn might want to look through your dry goods, Martha. We'll need supplies for the homestead, and I suspect she has a better idea of what's needed than I do." Dawn glanced at him, surprised by both the suggestion and the implicit trust it demonstrated. He was inviting her to make decisions about provisions for a home she hadn't yet seen, essentially acknowledging her role as mistress of his household. "I would be happy to help with that," Dawn said carefully, "and I offered to assist with mending as well." "Wonderful," Martha exclaimed. "Between the two of us, we'll get those shirts patched in no time, and you can tell me what you'll need for setting up your own household." As the men headed out to work on the fence, Martha led Dawn through the trading post, showing her the available goods. Unlike many frontier stores Dawn had glimpsed from a distance, MacGregor's was surprisingly well stocked, with quality fabrics, tools, and household items alongside the expected staples. "Angus makes a trip east twice a year," Martha explained as Dawn examined a bolt of sturdy cotton. "He says if we're going to be out here in the wilderness, we might as well have decent goods to sell." Dawn nodded, appreciating the philosophy. As she moved through the store, she selected items with care: flour, sugar, coffee, salt, and other basics. but also needles and thread, a few lengths of fabric, seeds for vegetables that would grow well in the climate Lucas had described, and a set of simple crockery. Martha watched with approval. "You have a practical eye," she commented. "Many new brides want fripperies and fancy things that just gather dust out here." Dawn paused in her selections, the word bride reminding her of the unusual nature of her situation. "Martha," she said hesitantly, "I should explain. Lucas and our arrangement is not conventional," Martha supplied with a knowing smile. "Few things are, out here in the territories. Angus and I met when he won me in a poker game from my first husband, a cruel man who saw me as property to be wagered." Dawn's eyes widened at this revelation. "Truly," Martha nodded, her expression softening with memory. "Angus had no intention of claiming me as a prize. He offered me passage back east to my family. But I'd seen how he treated everyone with respect, even the natives who came to trade, even the Chinese laborers others scorned. I chose to stay with him instead." She patted Dawn's hand. "The beginning of a marriage matters less than the character of the people in it, my dear." Dawn absorbed this wisdom, finding unexpected comfort in it. "Thank you for sharing your story," she said quietly. "Now," Martha said, returning to practical matters, "let's see about those shirts that need mending, and then I'll show you my vegetable garden. Lucas mentioned you might have knowledge of plants." The day passed pleasantly as Dawn helped with various tasks around the trading post. She found Martha's company refreshing. The older woman was direct, but kind, offering advice without being intrusive, and genuinely interested in Dawn's knowledge of traditional Apache medicine. Lucas and Mac Gregor returned midday for a brief meal, then went back to work. Dawn noticed Lucas watching her interactions with Martha, a thoughtful expression on his face that she couldn't quite interpret. By late afternoon, when the men returned from completing their repairs, Dawn had compiled a comprehensive list of supplies for the homestead and helped Martha prepare a hearty dinner. As they sat down to eat, Mac Gregor raised his cup in a toast. "To new beginnings," he said, nodding toward Lucas and Dawn. "May your home be blessed with prosperity and peace." "And children," Martha added with a smile, "this territory needs more good families putting down roots." Dawn felt her cheeks warm at the suggestion, carefully avoiding Lucas's gaze as she sipped her coffee. The casual assumption that they would build a life together, a complete life, with children, highlighted the peculiar nature of their arrangement. They had scarcely discussed what would happen when they reached his homestead, let alone the possibility of a shared future beyond that. After dinner, as Martha and Dawn washed the dishes, the older woman said quietly, "I've put fresh linens in both rooms, but—" "Well, you're welcome to share the guest room tonight. It's small but would accommodate both of you, being newlyweds and all." Dawn nearly dropped the plate she was drying. "That's very considerate," she managed to reply, "but the current arrangement is fine." Martha gave her a curious look but didn't press the issue. "As you wish, dear." Later, as darkness settled over the trading post and the others prepared for bed, Dawn found herself alone with Lucas on the front porch. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the vast sky, so different from the previous night's rain. "Mac Gregor says the weather should hold," Lucas said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "We can leave tomorrow if you're ready." Dawn nodded, her hands resting on the porch railing as she gazed out at the night. "The supplies I selected, I hope they meet with your approval. I tried to be practical." "I trust your judgment," Lucas replied simply. "You've shown good sense in everything else." Dawn turned to look at him, finding his expression difficult to read in the dim light from the lantern hanging by the door. "Lucas," she said, deciding directness was necessary, "what happens when we reach your homestead?" He considered the question carefully before answering. "That depends largely on what you want, Dawn. As I've said from the beginning, I don't consider you obligated to me in any way. The homestead can be a safe place for you to stay while you decide your next steps, or—" He hesitated. "Or," she prompted. "Or it could be your home," he finished quietly, "if you find you might want that." The offer hung in the air between them, weightier than it might have seemed to an outside observer. He wasn't just offering shelter, he was offering the possibility of a shared life. "I don't know what I want yet," Dawn admitted. Everything has happened so quickly. Lucas nodded, understanding in his eyes. Then we take each day as it comes, he said. No pressure, no expectations beyond mutual respect. Dawn studied him in the lantern light, this man who had upended the cruel plans of her tribe and offered her dignity instead of humiliation. In the short time she had known him, he had consistently shown her respect and consideration, rare commodities in her recent experience. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Lucas smiled, the expression transforming his face in a way that made Dawn's heart beat a little faster. "You don't need to thank me," he replied, "but you're welcome all the same." They stood together a moment longer, the night air cool around them, before bidding each other good night and returning inside. As Dawn settled into her bed, she found herself wondering what it might be like to truly be Lucas Callahan's wife, not just in name or according to a ceremony performed under duress, but in all the ways that mattered. It was a thought that both frightened and intrigued her, following her into dreams that were surprisingly peaceful. The next morning brought clear skies and favorable conditions for travel. After a hearty breakfast and warm farewells from the MacGregors, including a package of freshly baked bread and preserves from Martha Lucas, and Dawn set out with their replenished supplies and rested horses. "It's about 2 days' ride to the homestead if the weather holds," Lucas explained as they followed a well-established trail heading southwest. "We'll camp tonight near Cottonwood Springs, then reach Willow Creek by tomorrow evening." Dawn nodded, feeling a mixture of anticipation and nervousness at the prospect of seeing what might become her new home. The supplies they had purchased were secured on a packhorse borrowed from MacGregor, who had insisted they could return it the next time Lucas came to trade. As they rode, the landscape gradually changed from the dense forest of the higher elevations to more open country rolling hills covered with tall grasses and scattered stands of oak and pine. It was beautiful land, rich with game and natural resources, and Dawn found herself appreciating its beauty in a way she hadn't been able to during their frantic escape from the Comanche. "This is good country," she commented as they paused midday to rest the horses beside a small stream. Lucas nodded, scanning the horizon with evident pride. "It is. Fertile soil, reliable water, enough timber for building but enough open ground for grazing." He glanced at her. "Your people must have valued it as well." "My mother's tribe ranged further east," Dawn replied. "But yes, this would have been considered valuable territory." A comfortable silence fell between them as they ate a simple meal of bread, dried meat, and apples, another gift from Martha. Dawn found herself increasingly at ease in Lucas's company, their conversation flowing more naturally with each passing hour. As they continued their journey that afternoon, Lucas shared stories of his early days in the territory, his first attempts at ranching, mistakes he had made, lessons learned. Dawn listened with interest, occasionally offering observations or asking questions that revealed her own practical knowledge of living off the land. By late afternoon, they reached Cottonwood Springs, a peaceful oasis where a clear spring bubbled up amid a grove of towering cottonwood trees. It was an ideal camping spot, with fresh water, shelter, and good grazing for the horses. As they made camp, Dawn noticed how easily they fell into a rhythm of shared tasks, Lucas caring for the horses while she gathered firewood, him preparing the bedrolls while she started the fire. It felt natural, this division of labor, each contributing their skills without discussion or negotiation. Once their camp was established and a simple supper cooking over the fire, Lucas retrieved something from his saddlebag and returned to where Dawn sat. "I have something for you," he said, holding out a small package wrapped in soft leather. Dawn looked up in surprise, accepting the offering with hesitant hands. "What is this? Open it," he encouraged. She carefully unwrapped the leather to reveal a beautiful knife with a bone handle, smaller and more delicate than the hunting knife she carried but clearly of excellent craftsmanship. "I noticed you kept your father's knife close," Lucas explained as she examined the gift. "But it's a bit large for some tasks. This one is better suited for finer work, preparing herbs, detailed carving, that sort of thing." Dawn ran her finger along the smooth handle, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. It was practical yet personal, acknowledging both her heritage and her skills. "Thank you," she said, looking up to meet his gaze. "It's perfect." Lucas smiled, seeming pleased by her reaction. "I got it from Mac Gregor while you were helping Martha yesterday. He said it was made by a Blackfoot craftsman who trades with him occasionally." Dawn tested the knife's balance, appreciating its quality. "I will treasure it," she said sincerely. As they ate their evening meal, the conversation turned to practical matters regarding the homestead, what crops might grow well. Improvements Lucas had planned but not yet implemented, the condition of the small herd of cattle he maintained. "I've been focusing on building up the herd," he explained. "Started with just 5 cows and a bull 3 years ago. Now we're up to 20 head with 4 new calves this spring." "That's good growth," Dawn observed. "Sustainable," Lucas nodded. "I'd rather build slowly and surely than overextend. Too many settlers come out here with grand plans and no patience, then lose everything to one bad winter or dry summer." Dawn appreciated his practical approach, so different from the get-rich-quick mentality that drove many Western settlers. "Your garden," she said. "What have you planted there?" "Potatoes, beans, corn, squash," Lucas replied. "Some tomatoes that struggle in the heat. As I mentioned, it's probably overrun with weeds by now. I've been gone nearly 3 weeks." "I can help with that," Dawn offered. "My mother taught me much about growing plants, both for food and medicine." Lucas's expression brightened. "I'd welcome your expertise," he said. "My efforts have been more enthusiastic than skilled." As night fell around them, they remained by the fire, talking easily about practical aspects of the homestead and sharing stories of their respective childhoods. Dawn found herself speaking more freely than she had in years, describing her mother's healing practices and her father's tales of the eastern cities he had left behind. Lucas, in turn, shared memories of his Irish mother's songs and stories, and his father's determination to build a life in the untamed Western territories. Both had died of influenza when Lucas was 12, leaving him to make his own way in the world. "That must have been difficult," Dawn said softly, "being so young and alone." Lucas poked at the fire, his expression distant with memory. "It was. But I was fortunate a rancher named Thompson took me in, taught me to work cattle. I stayed with his family until I was 17, then set out on my own." As the fire burned down to embers, they prepared for sleep, arranging their bedrolls on opposite sides of the dying flames. The night was peaceful, with only the soft hooting of an owl and the occasional rustle of nocturnal creatures disturbing the silence. "Good night, Dawn," Lucas said as they settled beneath their blankets. "Good night, Lucas," she replied, finding comfort in the now familiar exchange. As she drifted towards sleep, Dawn realized that she was no longer thinking of their journey in terms of escape or survival. Instead, she found herself looking forward to seeing the homestead Lucas had described, curious about the life he had built and wondering if there might be a place for her within it. The thought should have frightened her, this gradual shift from wariness to tentative anticipation. Yet as sleep claimed her beneath the vast, star-filled sky, Dawn felt only a quiet sense of possibility. The final day of their journey dawned clear and warm, promising perfect traveling conditions. They broke camp efficiently, both now accustomed to the routine they had established, and set out as the sun was climbing above the eastern horizon. "We'll reach my land by mid-afternoon," Lucas said as they rode side by side along a well-worn trail. "The cabin is in a small valley, protected from the worst of the winter winds. There's good water year-round from Willow Creek, which runs right through the property." Dawn nodded, listening intently to his description. She had grown increasingly curious about this place that might become her home, at least temporarily. The landscape continued to change as they traveled, becoming more varied with patches of woodland interspersed with open meadows rich with wildflowers. Game was plentiful. They spotted deer grazing in the distance, and once a fox darted across their path, its russet coat gleaming in the sunlight. "This is beautiful country," Dawn commented as they crested a rise that offered a panoramic view of the surrounding terrain. It is, Lucas agreed, his pride in the land evident. Wait until you see the valley, it's even better. By early afternoon, Lucas began pointing out landmarks that indicated they were approaching his property, a distinctive rock formation, a bend in the creek they were following, a lone pine tree standing sentinel on a hillside. Just over this rise, he said finally, an undercurrent of excitement in his voice. As they reached the top of the gentle slope, the valley opened up before them. Dawn drew a breath of appreciation at the scene. A small but well-built log cabin stood near the center of the valley, smoke curling lazily from its stone chimney. A barn and several smaller outbuildings were arranged nearby, and a fenced garden plot was visible beside the cabin. A clear stream, Willow Creek, presumably wound through the valley, bordered by the graceful trees that gave it its name. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully in lush pastures. Someone's there, Dawn observed, noticing the smoke from the chimney. Lucas nodded. That would be Miguel Fernandez. He watches the place when I'm away trading, tends the livestock, keeps an eye on things. They rode down into the valley, and as they approached the cabin, a man emerged from the barn, middle-aged, with graying hair and a weathered face that broke into a wide smile at the sight of them. Lucas. He called, walking forward to meet them. You return at last, I was beginning to worry. His accent was distinctly Mexican, but his English was fluent. Sorry to be late, Miguel, Lucas replied as they reached the yard. We had some unexpected adventures. Miguel's curious gaze shifted to Dawn, a question in his eyes as Lucas dismounted and moved to help her from her horse. Miguel Fernandez, this is Dawn Hawk Callahan, Lucas said, the addition of his surname to hers still strange to Dawn's ears. My wife. Miguel's eyebrows shot up in astonishment. Wife, he repeated, looking between them, then a broad grin spread across his face. Dios mío, this is wonderful news. He stepped forward and clasped Lucas's hand warmly, then gave a respectful nod to Dawn. Welcome, Senora Callahan. This is a happy surprise indeed, Dawn returned his greeting, touched by the genuine warmth of his welcome. There was no suspicion or judgment in his eyes, only sincere pleasure at the news. Come inside, Miguel urged. I have stew cooking. You must be tired from your journey. As Lucas helped Miguel unload their horses and tend to the animals, Dawn found herself drawn to the cabin that might become her home. From the outside, it was simple but well constructed, with a covered porch spanning its front and windows that caught the afternoon light. Flower beds, somewhat neglected but still showing signs of careful planting, flanked the path to the door. When she entered, Dawn was pleasantly surprised by the interior. The main room was larger than she had expected, with a stone fireplace at one end and a cooking area at the other. A solid table with 4 chairs stood in the center, and comfortable-looking furniture was arranged near the hearth. Everything was clean and orderly, if somewhat sparse. A doorway led to what appeared to be a bedroom, and a ladder against one wall suggested a loft space above. The cabin smelled of wood smoke, herbs, and the savory stew simmering in a pot over the fire. Miguel had followed her inside. It is not fancy, he said, misinterpreting her silence as disappointment, but it is a good home. It is very nice, Dawn assured him. Much larger than I expected. Miguel smiled, relieved. Lucas has worked hard on it. Last winter he added the second room and improved the roof. He gestured toward the stew. Please sit, you must be hungry after your journey. By the time Lucas joined them, Miguel had served 3 bowls of his hearty stew and sliced a fresh loaf of bread he had baked that morning. As they ate, Lucas shared an abbreviated version of how he and Dawn had come to be married, emphasizing the Apache ceremony but omitting the more troubling aspects of the tribe's treatment of her. Miguel listened with interest, occasionally glancing at Dawn with newfound respect. So you know the old ways of medicine? He asked when Lucas mentioned her knowledge of healing plants. Dawn nodded. My mother was a healer among her people. She taught me much before she died. This is very good, Miguel said with enthusiasm. My wife, Rosalinda, she has been struggling with pain in her joints. Perhaps you could speak with her sometime. We live just over that rise to the east, about a mile from here. I would be happy to, Dawn replied, touched by his immediate acceptance of her skills. As the meal concluded, Miguel rose to leave. "I will return tomorrow to help with anything you need," he said to Lucas. "But tonight, you should have privacy to settle in." His eyes twinkled with meaning that made Dawn glance away, embarrassed. After Miguel departed, a slightly awkward silence fell between Lucas and Dawn. The reality of their situation alone together in this cabin, ostensibly as husband and wife, suddenly seemed more immediate than it had during their journey. "Let me show you around properly," Lucas suggested, breaking the tension. He led her through the cabin, pointing out features and explaining his plans for future improvements. The second room, as Dawn had guessed, was a bedroom with a large bed frame supporting a straw-filled mattress covered with clean linens. "This was my room," Lucas explained. "It's yours now. I'll sleep in the loft." Dawn turned to him, surprised by the offer. "This is your home." "I cannot take your room." Lucas shook his head firmly. "A gentleman doesn't let a lady sleep in a loft," he said with a small smile. "Besides, it's comfortable up there. I often sleep there anyway in the summer when the lower room gets too warm." Dawn wanted to protest further but recognized the determination in his expression. "Thank you," she said instead. He showed her the rest of the homestead, the barn with its stalls for horses and storage for hay, the chicken coop where a dozen hens scratched and clucked, the garden that was indeed somewhat overgrown but still productive, and the smokehouse where meat was preserved. "It's not much compared to some of the bigger ranches," Lucas admitted as they completed their tour, "but it's growing each year." "It's impressive," Dawn said sincerely. "You have built something substantial here." Lucas looked pleased by her assessment. "There's room to expand when the time is right," he said. "More cattle, perhaps some sheep eventually. The garden could be twice its current size." As the sun began to set, they returned to the cabin. Lucas built up the fire while Dawn, finding a natural place in this new environment, began organizing the supplies they had brought from Mac Gregor's. "I noticed the garden has space for more medicinal herbs," she commented as she worked. "Would you mind if I planted some?" "Not at all," Lucas replied, looking up from the fire. "Plant whatever you think would be useful. This is your home now too, Dawn." The simple statement, offered without pressure or expectation, touched something deep within her. For the first time since her mother's death, someone was offering her a place where she truly belonged. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything." Lucas met her gaze across the room, his expression gentle. "You don't need to keep thanking me," he said, "but you're welcome all the same." They prepared a simple supper together, working side by side in companionable silence. As they ate at the solid table that Lucas had built himself, Dawn found herself imagining what it might be like to share meals like this every day, to build a life in this peaceful valley with this unusual man who had rescued her from humiliation and treated her with unfailing respect. After the meal, as Lucas showed her where everything was kept in the cabin and explained the routine of the homestead, Dawn made a decision. When he prepared to climb to the loft for the night, she stopped him with a gentle hand on his arm. "Lucas," she said softly, "I would like to speak with you about our arrangement." He turned to face her, his expression open but cautious. "Of course." Dawn took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "When we left my tribe, you said I would be free to make my own choices. That our marriage was only as real as I wished it to be." Lucas nodded, waiting for her to continue. "I have been thinking about what I want," Dawn said carefully. "And I believe I would like to stay, not just temporarily, but as your true wife." Lucas's eyes widened slightly, hope and caution warring in his expression. "Dawn," he said gently, "you don't need to make such a decision so quickly. You can take all the time you need." "I know," she replied, "and perhaps it seems sudden. But these days with you have shown me what kind of man you are. You rescued me not to possess me, but to restore my dignity. You have treated me with respect and kindness at every turn." She paused, then added softly, "Such a man would make a good husband, I think." Lucas studied her face as if searching for any sign of doubt or obligation. "Are you certain? I don't want you to feel that you owe me this." "I am certain," Dawn said firmly. "I choose this. I choose you." The joy that transformed his face in that moment was answer enough, but Lucas put it into words as well. "Then I am the most fortunate of men," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "because I have come to care for you deeply, Dawn Hawk Callahan." He reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, and gently touched her cheek. When she leaned into his touch, his other arm slipped around her waist, drawing her closer. Their first kiss was tentative, a gentle exploration rather than a passionate claim. But as Dawn's arms wound around Lucas's neck, the kiss deepened, becoming a promise of the life they might build together, equal partners, each valuing the other's strength and uniqueness. When they finally parted, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "I never expected to find a wife on that trading journey," he said with a soft laugh. "Especially not one as remarkable as you," Dawn smiled, a genuine expression of happiness that felt unfamiliar but welcome on her face. "And I never expected to find a husband who would see me for who I truly am," she replied. That night, they shared the bedroom that was now theirs together, their union a true joining of hearts rather than the mockery her tribe had intended. As Dawn drifted towards sleep in Lucas's arms, she reflected on the strange path that had led her here from outcast to beloved in the span of a few extraordinary days. Perhaps Morning Star had been right after all. Sometimes the Great Spirit did indeed have plans that could not be seen until they unfolded. 5 years later, Dawn stood in the expanded garden of the Callahan homestead, her hands gentle as she showed her 4-year-old daughter, Lily, how to harvest herbs without damaging the plants. "Like this, Mama?" the child asked, her small fingers carefully pinching off a sprig of mint. "Perfect," Dawn praised. "You have a gentle touch, just like your father." Lily beamed at the comparison, her dark eyes so like Dawn's own sparkling with pleasure. With her black hair and copper skin, she clearly showed her mixed heritage. But unlike her mother, Lily would grow up in a home where that heritage was celebrated rather than scorned. From the nearby corral came the sound of laughter as Lucas showed their 2-year-old son, Thomas, how to feed a carrot to one of the gentler horses. The boy's delighted giggles carried across the homestead, making Dawn smile as she continued her lesson with Lily. The Callahan ranch had prospered in the 5 years since Dawn had arrived. The cattle herd had tripled in size, and Lucas had added sheep that produced wool Dawn spun and wove during the winter months. The garden had expanded significantly under her care, now producing not only food for their table, but also medicinal herbs that Dawn prepared for her growing practice as a healer. Word had spread throughout the region about Mrs. Callahan's remedies, and people came from miles around seeking her skills. Dawn had combined her mother's traditional knowledge with what she learned from medical books Lucas ordered from the East, creating a unique healing practice that bridged 2 worlds. The cabin, too, had grown with their family. Lucas had added 2 more rooms the previous year, a bedroom for the children, and a dedicated space for Dawn's healing work. The original structure had been improved with polished wood floors and larger windows that filled the home with light. As Dawn and Lily finished their harvesting and headed toward the house with their basket of herbs, Miguel and Rosalinda Fernandez arrived in their wagon for their weekly visit. Their own children, teenagers, now jumped down to play with Lily, while Rosalinda, whose joint pain had greatly improved under Dawn's care, hurried forward with a covered dish. "I brought that squash dish you liked," she announced, embracing Dawn warmly. The 2 women had become close friends over the years, with Rosalinda teaching Dawn traditional Mexican cooking while Dawn shared her knowledge of native medicines. Lucas approached with Thomas on his shoulders, greeting Miguel with a hearty handshake. The 2 men had expanded their partnership, with Miguel now raising horses on his own adjacent property that Lucas helped to train and sell. As they all moved toward the house for the shared meal that had become a weekly tradition, Dawn felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. The homestead had become more than just a place of safety. It was truly a home, filled with love and respect and the happy chaos of family life. Later that evening, after their friends had departed and the children were asleep in their beds, Dawn and Lucas sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. His arm was around her shoulders, her head resting comfortably against him. "I was thinking," Lucas said, breaking their companionable silence. About the day we met. Dawn looked up at him, curious. What about it? How strange it is that something meant to cause pain could lead to so much happiness. He tightened his arm around her. They thought they were discarding something of little value. They couldn't see the treasure they had in their midst. Dawn smiled, touched by his words. The Great Spirit works in mysterious ways, she said, echoing what Morning Star had told her so long ago. Perhaps it was always meant to be this path. Lucas pressed a kiss to her temple. I believe it was, he said softly. I can't imagine any other life now. As the night deepened around them, Dawn reflected on the journey that had brought her here from rejection to acceptance, from isolation to belonging, from mockery to love. The tribe that had cast her out had unwittingly given her the greatest gift, a chance at a life where she was valued for exactly who she was. Neither can I, she whispered, turning to meet her husband's lips with her own. In the wild heart of the Western Territories, where two cultures often clashed with violence and misunderstanding, Dawn and Lucas Callahan had created something rare and precious, a home where differences were celebrated, where respect flourished, and where love had transformed a cruel joke into a beautiful reality. And as they retired to their bedroom hand in hand, both knew with absolute certainty that what had begun as mockery had become the most genuine blessing of their lives.